We are about to take a truly mind-bending journey in this explainer. We're going to start way down at the foundational building blocks of reality, the microscopic architecture of the periodic table. And we're going to follow it all the way out to a highly speculative post-catastrophe future. But here is the massive twist. That deep future might actually loop right back around to explain our most ancient human mythologies. It's this wild story of how matter builds up into its absolute peak technological form, completely shatters, and then totally reorganizes human society. Let's dive right in.
So, to really understand this, we have to look at the raw materials of existence. We need to ask what actually happens when the wet biology of carbon meets the cold computation of silicon. We tend to think of the periodic table as just this static list of chemicals you memorized in high school. But what if it's actually a map of emerging capabilities? What if it's literally a progression showing how matter becomes capable of increasingly complex organization? To understand the ultimate future human body, we really have to look closely at these foundational ingredients.
There's this absolutely fascinating juxtaposition between two absolute powerhouses of the periodic table. On one side, you've got carbon, atomic number 6. Carbon is just unparalleled at building complex networks. It gives us the vast molecular architectures required for all terrestrial life. It's the biological scaffolding. But right on the other side is silicon, atomic number 14. While they both have 4 valence electrons, silicon is built for something entirely different. It excels at controllable solid-state electronic behavior. Basically, carbon builds the biological substrate, while silicon lays down the infrastructure for abstract information processing.
But this progression isn't just about elements getting heavier, right? It's about unlocking entirely new realms of functional capability. Carbon gives us biology, silicon gives us computing. But to build a true mechanical hybrid, we need actual physical force. And that brings us to the transition metals, specifically cobalt, atomic number 27. Cobalt and its neighbors unlock a totally different kind of chemistry. They bring us heavy-duty magnetism, high-performance alloys, and massive energy storage. Suddenly, we aren't just looking at chemicals anymore, we're looking at the functional components of an advanced machine.
So the crucial takeaway here is that a true mech isn't just, a metal suit wrapped around a human being. It represents a peak civilizational convergence. It's biological matter, computational matter, and engineered matter, all fusing into one functional system. When you integrate carbon-based tissue, silicon-based intelligence, and cobalt-powered mechanical force, you aren't just building a robot. Actually, scratch that, you're not building a robot at all. You are creating a new, unified composite embodiment. This is the absolute apex of what we'll call the CC-CO, carbon, silicon, cobalt civilization.
But what happens when this peak CC-CO civilization shatters? Because if history and archaeology show us anything, it's that complex societies are incredibly fragile. A civilization can completely die out without humanity dying out. Imagine some massive event, a cascading ecological failure, or maybe an asteroid impact that completely collapses the grid. The survivors are left in a very, very strange reality. They aren't primitive humans starting from scratch. They are post-collapse humans sitting among the ruins of a highly advanced world that they can no longer reproduce or maintain.
If the surface of the Earth rapidly becomes uninhabitable, we see what we can call a catastrophic sorting. The remaining population doesn't just scatter randomly into the woods. They are forced into 3 highly specific survival environments, totally dictated by whatever high-level technologies they happen to have access to the exact moment the lights go out. Humanity is instantly sorted into vertical realms: the sky, the water, and the underground. And the survival numbers in each of these realms, they are drastically different.
Up in the sky, we are literally talking about maybe a few hundred survivors. These are the people who manage to endure in orbital stations or lunar habitats. This is a brutal, extreme selection of technical elites. They have access to nuclear power, advanced closed-loop life support, and just incredible technical knowledge. But they have absolutely zero industrial base. So they are the most technologically sophisticated, yet ironically, the most physically fragile population left in existence.
Down in the water, the numbers are slightly higher, maybe in the tens of thousands. These survivors are enduring in nuclear submarines and deep-sea research habitats. To survive down there, you have to rely on intense naval hierarchy, stealth, and extreme aquatic endurance. They have high military-grade tech and reactors, but they are incredibly poor at large-scale manufacturing or growing food. The sea essentially becomes both their protective mother and their inescapable prison.
And then we look underground. This is where the millions go. They take refuge in military bunkers, massive subway systems, natural caves, you name it. But here is the catch. Without reliable power, medicine, and food, they lose their high technology very, very quickly. Within just a few generations, they fall back to an agrarian or even earlier state of living. But they have the numbers. They become the great demographic reservoir of human survival. They are the ones who maintain sheer demographic continuity in the dark.
All right, now let's fast forward roughly 2,000 to 2,500 years. That's about 50 to 100 generations of total isolation. The atmosphere finally clears, the surface of the Earth softens, it heals, and it becomes livable again. These three isolated branches of humanity finally step back out into the open. But listen, these aren't just different cultures meeting anymore. After 50 generations of extreme environmental adaptation, they are practically different species based on their highly distinct survival paths. The Great Reunion begins.
When these groups finally clash, a very clear pattern emerges. From the perspective of the now primitive surface dwellers, the sky people descending from orbit with surviving technology look indistinguishable from absolute magic. They arrive essentially as radiant gods. Think of the ancient traditions of figures like Anu or Atum. They have long horizon planning, they possess this deep psychological habit of command, and they absolutely demand that the chaotic, recovering world be brought back into strict order.
At the exact same time, from the depths of the oceans, the submarine-descended water people emerge. In ancient lore, these map perfectly to figures like the Apgallu in ancient Mesopotamia, the fish-cloaked sages who rise from the abyssal waters. Because they deeply understand closed systems and high-tech endurance, they naturally become liminal sages. They end up serving as the crucial intermediaries who translate the high knowledge of the sky people down to the massive, primitive populations living on the Earth.
This whole situation creates an inevitable, massive societal dynamic. It's the ultimate trade-off rooted in basic human survival. The Earth dwellers have vast numbers, immense local knowledge, and they are incredibly adapted to surviving scarcity. They are the workforce. They are the ones who actually have to lift the heavy stones and farm the dirt to rebuild the world. The ruling elites from the sky and water have fractional numbers, but they hold the ancient tools and that unshakable habit of command. So they forge covenants out of pure necessity. The elites provide the architecture and the laws, and the Earth dwellers provide the muscle.
Now here is the realization that flips our perspective entirely. What if we aren't just predicting a sci-fi future here? What if the three realms of ancient mythology, the sky gods, the deep water sages, and the earth-born populations, map perfectly onto the logical survival sorting of a collapsed technological civilization? Think about it. The structural sequence is always the same. A preceding world of wonders, a massive catastrophe, survivors in isolated realms, and a rebuilding phase where fragmented high-tech knowledge eventually becomes documented as myth.
Just consider the presence of horns in ancient lore across entirely different, isolated cultures. Notice how they aren't just random decorations. They consistently appear on figures like Enki, the Apkallu, or the Indus Valley figures. In this framework, horns act as a visual shorthand for concentrated liminal power. They are placed specifically on the beings who cross between these survival realms, the high gods who descend, or the water sages who rise up. They mark the mediators of a shattered world. When we map the ancient roles to these future realities, it just perfectly aligns. The sky is the domain of high-energy, long-horizon planning elites. The water represents mastery over closed, extreme environments. The Earth is all about raw numbers, labor, and sheer demographic continuity. And those horns, which by the way later evolve into royal crowns, are simply markers of the high-tech threshold mediators. The ancient gods and sages are the exact sociological roles a shattered CCMX civilization would inevitably, predictably fall back into.
So we are truly looking at an Ouroboros, a cyclic loop of history and matter. Step 1 is the physical evolution of elements from carbon to silicon to cobalt. Step 2 is those elements building a peak hybrid mech body. Step 3 is the catastrophic sorting that breaks that civilization apart into the isolated realms of sky, water, and earth. And step 4 is the mythic reunion, reassembling society into the very archetypes of gods, sages, and workers that our ancient ancestors told stories about around the fire.
To really fully grasp the magnitude of this cycle, we have to recognize a massive paradigm shift in how we view history. We have to separate origin memory from survival memory. Origin memory asks, where did humanity biologically evolve? But survival memory asks a much more grounded question. How did our specific ancestors get through the last great destruction? What we have assumed for centuries were primitive myths about the creation of the world might actually just be highly accurate survival memories of how different factions rode out the apocalypse.
I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on.
The cycle of matter, catastrophe, and mythology isn't just something in the ancient past. It's a strange attractor that we are actively moving toward right now as our own technology peaks. If the grid falls tomorrow and this great sorting happens all over again, will your descendants be the radiant gods of the sky, the mysterious sages of the sea, or the resilient people of the earth?